Hello, friends. This is Darren Hayes of Pigskin.com. Before we take you to your favorite Sports History Network show, just want to tell you a little bit about some merch that you can pick up that represents your favorite SHN podcast. So far, there's t-shirts, coffee mugs, and even books from some of the authors that do podcasts right here on SHN. Who could buy something better than that than have the history right from the gentleman that you hear talking about it? But we also are adding things each and every day. And where's that store, may you ask? Well, it's at sportshistorynetwork.com. Up at the top, there is the SHN merch button. Click on that. It'll take you right to the store, and you can be representing your favorite podcast and show the world that, hey, on the swag that I'm using, it's the headquarters of sports yesteryear, Sports History Network, and my favorite podcaster, the Sports History Network store. Shop there today. One of the great names in football history is Glenn Pop Warner. We love how he was a player and a coach, a great innovator. And today, FootballArchaeology.com's Tim Brown joins us to tell us about Warner in his first year of coaching as a member of the Cornell Big Red. We have Tim's story and more coming up in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with PigskinDispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And talking about football history, we are going into football archaeology mode because it's Tuesday, and Timothy P. Brown is here to visit with us once again to talk about one of his fantastic posts that he puts out each and every day. Tim, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Hello, Darren. Thanks for having me back. Looking forward to chatting once again.
This every Tuesday is really quite remarkable. Love hearing about your tidbits. Get to see your tidbits each and every day, but having a conversation about them once a week is really an amazing thing. It takes you a little bit more in depth. Some other great facts that you have through your research on some of these tidbits. And today you're going to talk about one of my favorite people in football, Glenn Pop Warner, who was born probably about an hour away from where I live, south of Buffalo, not too far from Erie. And, I love Pop Warner stories, and he has so many great ones and, coached all over the country. So this one's a really interesting one from one of his early years that love to hear about.
Yeah. I think Pop Warner's, just kind of a fascinating character. And so, love him as well. But I think this is another one of these where, we bring certain assumptions to our view of football here in, the 2020s that just were not the case back in the 1890s when this story is based. And so the key point there is that with Pop Warner being one of the guys like this, but, before 1900 for sure, and then even after that, a lot of people, young men ended up on college campuses who had never played football before, and yet who went out for the football team. So, if you lived out east and you were going to Harvard or Yale or something like that, well, chances are you probably attended some kind of prep school and they had a long history of football. They started playing fairly early on. But if you were from, small town Kansas or Minnesota, they might have played and they might not. There was certainly football going on in the smallest and remotest of towns, but there was a lot of places where they just weren't playing yet. So you'd be aware of the game. It'd be in your local newspaper, but you may not have ever played. And so a lot of really top-notch athletes showed up on campus, not having any football experience. And so part of the coach's job was to figure out how to get those guys to join the team and try. And so, we've talked in the past about the alums who would come back and help coach. And a lot of that was they were teaching entirely, they were teaching guys who had never played the game before. How do you block? How do you tackle? How do you get out of your stance? All the stuff that, most people now learn in youth football or as freshmen in high school or sophomores in high school, whatever it may be. They had to pick up those skills as freshmen in college. So, the article is basically about him and the challenge of, trying to get, at the time he was coaching at Cornell. He had gone to Cornell and played 4 years, and then I think he was gone for a year and came back at the time that this story occurred. But he's trying to figure out, how do I get all these guys to join, and then to get them schooled up in order to to field a good team. And so he was commenting that a lot of times back then they used to call like the talent level, they would call it the material. We have fine material, but it's inexperienced, right? And so that was his thing. And another piece of that was that was just interesting is in that particular year, he had an athlete who had played center in the past, and he was considering having the guy play left halfback or right halfback. And it was like, okay, how many times nowadays in a college setting do you have one player and you're going, should I play him at center or halfback? Right? I mean, that just doesn't happen nowadays. The body types have morphed and training and all that kind of stuff. But back then, I mean, that was just a kind of a normal everyday thing. And unfortunately for the guy, he ended up playing center. But yeah. So I think it's just that our thinking. Now we live in this world where these kids are recruited. I mean, they're heavily recruited, and they've there's game film. There's plenty of film on every high school kid that's out there. Nowadays. And so, but then it was like, you called for, you had tryouts, you called for everybody to come and join the team, and it was whoever was there, right? And, you would often have some guy who was a star fullback or quarterback or tackle the previous year that for whatever reason, financial or whatever, just didn't show up the next year. The coaches wouldn't know necessarily. They wouldn't have a whole lot of advance notice. It'd just be like, oh, Bill didn't show up this year, so we got to find somebody else to play tackle. So just the kind of manpower planning and depth charts that we think of today.
Well, it might be turning back to that with the transfer portal, because it seems like somebody's leaving constantly on teams, and new people are coming in.
Yeah. That's a whole other story. I mean, just for one of, I'm all for it. Just, I mean, I may not like what it's doing to the game, but for the individual kids, I'm all for it. I mean, I'm glad they get to go wherever they can go. So, but yeah, I mean, it's just, the center versus halfback thing is interesting, just because, a lot of times, centers were pretty good athletes back then, meaning, they were more like halfback or, fullback type guys. A lot of times teams pulled centers or, expected them to do some special stuff. So they had to be pretty darn good athletes, but not a whole lot of guys shifting from O-line to the backfield these days. High school level, sure.
Right. But it was a single platoon football back in that era too. So, they could use their athleticism at the center on defense, which we call a nose guard today, shooting gaps or whatever they had to do, warding off, to get a tackle. So, and it takes some certain athleticism to, rules were different than to get the ball snapped without getting your head knocked off too. I'm sure you had to be pretty quick at that. So I could see where the transition is on that. That was a fascinating point of that. But something I really took out of that, it's sort of, like I said, I like to read about Pop Warner, and I don't know that I've ever remember this story. And it's sort of, his humble beginnings. Most of us are used to Pop Warner, developing, the complicated single wing offense and the double wing and all these innovations he brought into football. But just to sit there and think about the man, having to take football at the very fundamentals and teach somebody that's not familiar with the game, and putting him out there on a Saturday to play as maybe a starting center or halfback or whatever. It's just kind of an interesting aspect of the man, and probably all coaches at that time had to do something like that, or they couldn't, have their schemes all in play until they got the people up to speed. So,
yeah, well, and to your point, I think the fact that Cornell wasn't the only school in that position, right? I mean, all their opponents, or many of their opponents anyways, were in the same kind of situation where, they had a bunch of guys that had never played before. So, and, I mean, that was one of the reasons why the freshman rule, worked to their advantage. But, yeah, so it's, Warner was just, he grew up in, like, as you said, I can't think of the name of the town, but small town, Western New York state.
Springville, New York.
Yeah. And he was just a big dude, I mean, he showed up on campus and they were like, hey, he started his first game, and he didn't know what he was doing. But he started just because he was just, pretty thick, sort of guy, maybe not the tallest man in the world, but, big, thick dude. And so you become a lineman that way.
Yeah. I'm going to have to look it up because you made me think, I think Park H. Davis is from that same area. He's from Jamestown, New York, which is not too far. I wonder if they ended up ever playing against each other, or if maybe they weren't the same years of playing high school.
Yeah, I think Davis would have been at Princeton in the 1880s, right? And early 90s.
Oh, yeah. Maybe he's quite a bit older than Warner then.
Yeah. Because, Warner showed up at Cornell at like 91, 92, something in that range. So I think, Davis is just that much older, because he was coaching Lafayette when Fielding Yost, was the ringer for him, against Penn.
That's true. Yes, he's probably good 15 years older than Warner, probably. Well, there goes that fantasy. I've seen those two.
Well,
reading about those two head to head.
I love the stories about guys who grew up in the same areas, or even if it's across sports, but guys who knew one another, or those kinds of stories, and just the connections that you just normally don't think about. So it's kind of fun. That way.
So real fascinating. From Cornell to Carlisle, the Pitt, the Stanford. Pop Warner was all across the country and had a lot of success everywhere he went, and a pretty interesting guy and pretty humble guy to sit there and pick out athletes and teach them how to play the game. So I guess it's very aptly named the junior football today. Most of them are called Pop Warner football. So
yeah.
Very interesting. Another great tidbit, Tim. We really appreciate that, and that you share these with us each and every day. And the listeners, there's a way for you too to pick up on Tim's tidbits and get a copy of them sent to you too. And Tim will explain that to us right now.
Yeah. If you're interested, just go to footballarchaeology.com, and down at the bottom of most of the pages, you can click on it and subscribe. And if you subscribe, you're going to get an email every evening at 7:00, and then a couple of others here and there. Basically it's just whatever got published that day shows up in your inbox. And so you can, read them at your leisure. I also, everything I post, I'm still putting out on Twitter. And so if that's your way of receiving, various forms of news like this, then, follow me on Twitter. But, best thing is probably just to subscribe and make your life easier and much more pleasant.
Yeah, and it's footballarchaeology.com it's a great site, and it's also a great conduit to get to some of Tim's books he has out. He has his most recent one, Hut Hike, with some football terminology, and one of my old standbys, How Football Became Football. It's a great read, and especially learning about early college football. And I highly recommend both those books to anybody interested in it for be a aficionado of football history, because Tim does a great job on that. So, hey, Tim, thanks a lot for joining us here again, and we'll talk to you again next Tuesday.
Okay, looking forward to it. Thank you, Darren.
We're taking a peek over at the chains and the down marker. It's 4th and long. We're going to have to punt the ball and get on out of here, but we'll have another series tomorrow for your football history headlines, so be sure to tune in. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast. PigskinDispatch.com is a proud affiliate of the Sports History Network, the headquarters of sports yesteryear.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.